all about him. Let me just.
You got to say you got it.
Yeah, I clicked on the got it, and somebody wrote a newspaper article about him, and apparently said he died last year. So,
I was 94.
94.
Yeah, pretty good life.
Oh, goodness. Well, as far as I can tell, you have a pulse, and if not, you're a darn good ghost. The other thing I want to make clear, because there may be some people here that really didn't want to hear you, don't take it offense, but this is not the William Masters that collaborated with Virginia Johnson on human sexual response back many decades ago. That guy is dead about 21 years ago, really. And as far as I know, Bill is not going to be talking about sex tonight, but kayaks and business. So
I don't see how many people drop off very quickly now.
yeah. Oh my gosh, they're all gone. All right. Well, anyway, I go back a long way. And there are a number of old timers here. And we go back to the era when there was not a lot of choice if you wanted to be a whitewater boater. If you're an open boater, you probably were paddling the top of the line Grumman canoe. If you're a kayaker, fiberglass technology was just coming in. And if you wanted such a boat, you built it. There was no commercial industry out there, or maybe a few years later, some bare bones. So, Bill, you go back a pretty long way. From what I can tell, you started in the composite boat business too.
Yes.
And were these boats of your own design?
No, I did that like everybody. I got a mold somebody out of Virginia or Ohio. And, when you stumble, we started off inner tubing down the Chattooga River, and then we found the canoe. And so I welded the canoe. And so an old aluminum canoe. So then we stumbled into kayakers, and they said, well, the only way you get a boat is build one. So I didn't know anything about building them, but around our area, we have Clark Swable, which was a weaver of fiberglass cloth, was just 20 miles away. So composites were kind of, you could go around and find somebody that did that around here. And that's what I did. I went around asking questions, and they were, oh, it's really simple. So I borrowed them all, paid for it. I forgot $15 or something like that for use. And then a friend of mine, Eddie Brazil, we were in high school together. We made the first boat in his garage. And we used round weave cloth, and it had so many pinholes in it that, you could clarify your flour in there. Put it in the water, and you could watch it leak from the inside. So that was the first.
But that was for your own use, I take it. When you had the idea you could sell it to somebody?
No, that was all mine. So that's the first boat I built. But the first boat I got, I relined a set of brakes on a car and tuned up a car, and they had a kayak that broken in half, and they gave me the kayak. I glued it back together, and that was my first. And then my first paddle was, closet rod with plywood blades and old May Weth life jacket. Gray skirt was, upholstery material. You upholster a Nagra hide, the little Nagras. Yeah, so that was all the beginning.
Shoot, that was my beginning. How come I didn't end up with a kayak company? So, well, of course, you're identified, your product's identified with polyethylene, rotomolding. Somebody experimented with that, Tom Johnson out in California, but I don't think it ever went anywhere, holoform boats. What made you think this was the future? And I'm curious, was anyone else heading this direction too that you know of?
No, not at the time. Tom ran into a friend who eventually became a really good friend of mine named Elmer Good. And Elmer and Sylvia were the two best friends during that era. During my 30s, we were every meeting we ever went to, and I became part of the Association of Rotational Molders. Once I learned about molding, and the way I learned about molding is one of my stockholders owned an injection molding company. And someone walked in and said, and he was telling them about what I had, and they said, oh, we can rotomold that. We have a machine down in Latta, South Carolina. And so they said, oh, you have to build a model. And then I was like, oh, well, I can take, anything and make a model. And they were like, no, it has to be expanded 3% for shrinkage.
Huh.
And that's when Keith Backlund and Keith was the one of Don Hamilton, Steve Scarborough, and myself were the original founders of Woodlight Paddles. And that's where we built the first model. It was small wood strips. And then half of it was in the Whitewater Center of the Ocoee that burned. And so it's gone. I got the other half in my garage of that original model. And so we had the mold made. I hopped everything I had, made the mold, and then sent it down to them, and they rotomolded it, but they couldn't get enough tilt, so the ends never formed. So the ends were like paper. And then I found out that they didn't have a machine. They just took a oven and put a burner out of a house oven, not an oven, a house furnace, in the side of a box that they made out of insulated panels, and put a device in there to rock it back and forth, and when it hit the floor before it got enough tilt. So I wound up going to Latta and spending a lot of nights down there and re-welding and at the local tractor shop, and rebuilt the machine and made it work. That's how it all got started. That was the quest. And almost lost everything I had.
Well, that was one of the questions I was having, is how you could learn this without any background. But so you had a boost. You had somebody who did at least know some of the technology.
Yeah. The way they rotomolded, they made tanks. And they had outside burners. Just imagine a great big ribbon of flame and a round cylinder, agricultural tank, and a big round cylinder, maybe in 4 to 6 feet in diameter, that rotated on a pivot. And they stood there and had a chain hoist that hoisted the rotating cylinder up and lowered it back down while there was a flame burner underneath it, and looked inside with a flashlight and watched the resin melt. Actually, it's a powder. That was the first introduction to rotomolding.
It sounds hazardous.
No, there's lots of great stories. It was also a waypoint for all the bikers in the low state South Carolina to weigh out all their drugs. So lots of stories, but not for here. That's how it started. That's how it started in rotomolding. Found out about the Association of Rotational Molding, and then got involved in that industry. And that's when I met Elmer. Elmer was noted by a lot of people as being the founder of rotational molding. And he helped develop that machine that Tom Johnson put his first boat on, and they were making tanks, and they wanted to get into the kayak world. Tom designed that boat. It was too round. It didn't get the shrinkage correct. That's why it never sold. Also, the cockpit was extremely small. You could barely get in it. I mean, for the little guys. But Tom was a character. Did anybody ever know him?
I just briefly met him, not enough to say I knew him.
Yeah. Just so one historical story about Tom Johnson. I was in line with him at a buffet out in Vegas, and Tom just breaks loose dancing, doing a kayak moves, and he was doing defects in and out of the buffet line. No joke, that really happened. So that's the craziness of some of the early people in the kayak industry. You know, and he was a fireman, great guy.
Yeah. Was he sober when he did this?
Yeah, he was.
Well, that just says more. Somebody who's that exuberant.
A character. He was a character. There's a lot of characters in this industry.
Well, yeah. I mean, you just be content with where you are otherwise. No, your background was electrical engineering. This doesn't exactly fit that.
Well, I was electrical engineering because that's what my dad wanted me to do. And so we grew up in poverty, and he always thought that I should go to college. He never finished high school, and so he wanted me to go to the Air Force Academy and be an electrical engineer, but he died when I was 16. So it made a big impact on me. And so I went to work at 18 out of high school, and then worked for a year, then got married like every good Southern boy should do. And then decided that this was, that was not the place for me. And so I applied to Clemson and went there and held down a full-time job and went to Clemson. Then second year in Clemson, I was working as a junior engineer at a company, and the guys there were kayakers, and they introduced me into kayaking kayak. And that's how I got really involved in it. And so then I worked my last couple of years Clemson making kayaks and selling them on the side, paid for my college.
Well, didn't you have a business at one time of composite boats? I thought I saw that somewhere.
Yeah, that was fiberglass technology in 1974. Before that, it was called Marble-Glass. I built molds for the synthetic marble industry, and that's how I got my fiberglass and resin to build my kayaks.
Okay.
He didn't know how to build the molds, so I convinced him I knew how, which I didn't. And so, but I learned quick.
Huh.
So that's how I started. That's how I built the first boats, by rebuilding and building molds for the synthetic marble industry, the bathroom vanities you see that are made out of the marble dust and resin.
Yeah. In fact, that's a technical detail I was wondering about there. Is I certainly understand how people made molds for making composite boats, but how do you make a metal mold?
Oh, just fabricate it. It's easy. I mean, you talk about, you're saying a metal kayak mold or a metal?
Yeah, the mold for rotomolding. I mean, look at those intense shapes you have.
They're made of a cast aluminum, the ones for kayak, because then you cast the contours. And porosity is always a problem. It's an art. There's lots, not lots. There's probably in that time there was 3 maybe mold makers in the United States. And being in the Association I was on the board of the Association of Rotational Molders, and then I chaired the technical committee for a while, and then I chaired the marketing committee for the organization. That's how I met Elmer. That's how I had all the great times, and that's how I had access to all the new technology. At one point, we were making a dancer kayak at 36 pounds. Those were the boats. Yeah, that was cross-linked polyethylene. And all the resin companies, we were novel. And again, being in the association gave me access to all kinds of things. I made a first well, it wasn't polyethylene, it was like Lexan, first Lexan kayak. Yeah, we actually rotomolded a Lexan kayak. Now that was great until you scraped it across a rock, and then it was not, since even it cracked right down the scrape.
Oh, I thought.
Yeah, they'd sink under you.
I thought Lexan would be unbreakable.
No, not sensitivity.
Well, I certainly, it was actually a question down the line I was going to bring up, was that we've always been a little disillusioned, well, some of us anyway. Polyethylene boats are so heavy. And is there any technology you think that's ever going to make an indestructible boat that isn't heavy?
No, the key word was indestructible. The answer is no, not indestructible, but it's all a balance. It could be made better. The reason polyethylene is it's just a fast, sloppy process now. Nobody to my knowledge, precision rotational molds anymore.
Uh-oh. Well, that's one reason I've hung with composites, but I'm not running 200-foot waterfalls either. So, so, well, you were talking about marketing, and it made me think back. during the boom days, I remember there was some tension about between brick and mortar shops and competition from backyard dealers. And where did you stand on this?
Oh, in the early days of kayaking, it was more of a religion to a lot of us. It really was. I mean, and you know as well as anyone, if you've ever done whitewater, it's a spiritual event. I mean, you just have to stop and realize how small you are. And so there was the backyard dealers, like a guy named Howard DeBow, River Runners in
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, Howard taught so many people. A guy named Roger up in either Knoxville or Chattanooga, same way, out of their basement. And those guys brought in lots of people to kayaking. They were religious zealots. And so the dealers would gripe, but the point is the dealers would gripe, and then I didn't realize at the time I got lucky enough that they had to have the product if they were going to sell kayaks. But the backyard dealers, they were very passionate about what they did. So they actually started helping the dealers, a lot of them. And so it all worked. And then as the industry grew much larger, then the REIs came online, and the Eastern Mountain Sports, all those guys. Well, when they came online, the regular dealers screamed bloody murder. Oh my God, REIs moved into my area. They're in Atlanta, and I'm 50 miles away. They're going to steal my business. No, they didn't. Every time we had a big box store open up, we introduced many, many more people to kayaking. And the little guys, once the person got into kayaking, they realized the little guy knew what he was talking about. The big box store it was like putting a piece of bait on the end of a hook and dragging it through the water. Well, once the smart fish caught on, they went to the professional dealer, and they always increased their sales. And that was a balancing act. And Risa did a great job of that. She hugged and kissed an awful lot of ugly people. Sorry, Risa, that's a hard way to say it, but you really did a great job of helping balance out these people, because dealers were always, oh, somebody's in my backyard.
Well, Howard actually, he had a store, River Runners Emporium.
He didn't have a store in the beginning.
Oh, that's a transition.
A lot of them made stores, and and you take Bob Taylor up at Appomattox. Did you know Bob?
You know Bob.
Bob started out, kind of as a hobby. He loved it, but Bob came from a family that had good business skills, and Bob was the model for an outdoor store. He ran a great shop.
No, and it's still there. I think his son-in-law is running it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he turned into a diver. And then he started getting old like all of us.
Well, that brings up another question I had right here, is that, okay, we know you're a good tinkerer, and we know that you have an engineering background and obviously a mind for that sort of thing, but that doesn't make a business on its own. You've got to be a good business person. Where'd you learn that?
Well, just, you got a beard. Okay. I used to have a big beard, except it wasn't white at the time. And I had hair down to my shoulders. And so every morning I would go to the post office, and I'd run into this guy. And a guy named Bill Rutledge, and he had a little business in Liberty, South Carolina, close to where I was. And we'd say our niceties to each other. Then one day Bill said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I make kayaks." And he said, "Can I come over and visit you?" And literally we were walking within a block of each other. And so he introduced me, and he said, I said, "Well, how you raise money?" And he said, "Well, I'll show you. I'll show you how to write an information memorandum." And he showed me.
Wow.
"And I'll introduce you to bankers. I'll introduce you to friends." And he did. And then from there, I networked out of that. And Bill was the first. I asked Bill one day, I said, "Bill, how do you value the company?" He said, "Look up at the sky." He said, "Is it blue?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, pick a number. It's whatever blue you want it to be." And that's how I valued the first stock. And Bill bought it. And then I went to other people. I ran into another guy named Bob Stewart. And Bob ran an injection molding company that I mentioned to you that introduced me to the rotor molding.
Mhm.
And Bob had a building and he says, well, why don't you go into my building? So I went into his building, but Bob scared me to death. He was a tough businessman. And I'm answering your question. Then he introduced me to other people like him who were tough. They didn't put up with the crap of going, oh, well, thank you for your money. I'm not telling you what I'm doing with it. It was financial statements every month, every quarter, every year they had to be audited. Here, let me show you how they get audited. So, you know, I didn't get spanked. I just got scolded very hard about what was expected from stockholders, and they were excellent stockholders. I did eventually buy them all out, and a few of them were kind of PO'd about it, but they did get a 25% a year return on their investment.
Ooh.
Decent, huh? And then I did that because I had a major life event. Nobody knew which way I was going to go. 25% though was okay, but it was a good, solid company and you could trust the numbers. So that's how I got into business. And then eventually I got into groups of business through these connections with the stockholders. And then from there, I got into peer forums. I was other businessmen who were running companies. And of course, I was started to grow quickly. And from there, I got introduced to good accountants, and all the other people. And, you know, whether you like it or not, you just stay around and eat the corn with everybody else. You'll eventually, you know, talk like them. So that's how I did it.
I'm impressed with the value of the networking here. But what if you weren't going down to the post office? This might have had a different outcome.
It would have.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't know what it would be, but Bill Rutledge, FlexiWall, that was his company. He was, and just for novelty, pure novelty, he was the campaign manager for a senator we used to have named Ernest Hollins.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Ernest, and it was Ernest Hollins and Strom Thurmond.
Yeah.
And that was the first, that was back when business got done on Politician. And I was sitting with Bill one day and he said, and a high level person within the political agenda was screaming on the phone to somebody, said, you want your damn swamp drain? I need this amount of money. Bill bunches over and punches my shoulder and says, you know what's going on? I was like, no. He said, he's getting campaign donations to get his permits to drain his swamp. This is how it works. I was in my late 20s.
That's an eye opener.
There was a lot of them. I had a lot of elders that really took me under wing.
Well, that's cool. There must have been some charm you had that they wanted to do that.
I was willing to work my butt off, and I listened and I did what they told me.
Well, that's the first step, listening. Well, you know, I was along the line of running the business. Of course, there's marketing, and I was. Did the world beat a path to your door, or how much was it at your end to make the world want these kayaks that you're building?
Well, I had no idea what marketing was, zero, but I built a good product, and I'm an engineer, and that's what I do. So I had quite a few patents in various fields, and I like building things. I mean, I was welding yesterday. It rained today, so. But I do a lot of that. But I tell you, the one who really kicked it off was a guy named Ken Horowitz. And I'd had a life tragic event. I had a death in the family, and I was out in Idaho, and I ran into Ken, and he'd had a life event, and he ran an outdoor store, but he was a genius at marketing. The guy could generate 6 letters an hour, and had just lots and lots of knowledge. He was amazing. So Ken became my marketing director, and Ken really put us on the market. He put us on the map. But I'll tell you one thing that was really important about Ken is we were both motorcycle riders. And he walked in one day and he always called me boss. And he was just a character, had a big beard. And he said, here, Harley Davidson. And this is in the early 80s. And when Harley had just sold an AMF, and he had that big #1, like it was #1, red, white, and blue stars on it in the USA, or Harley Davidson across the bottom of it. He said, it's a tractor. A BMW is a real mechanical machine, but a Harley is a tractor on 2 wheels. And we both, we drove Harleys, but it was a culture. And he said, they said they're #1. And you know what happened? They became #1. And so at that point, we called ourselves #1. And you know what happened? We became #1. It really worked. And Ken was behind it. The last I heard, he was in Alaska somewhere doing financial planning for fishermen.
Well, that's a change. Well, you pioneered the modern boat manufacturing and the modern boat, so to speak. And as natural, competing brands proliferated, was the market big enough to sustain competitors?
Well, and gosh, the lowest growth rate I ever had was 9%. I averaged 20. But in the 93, after the Olympics, 92, I was hitting 37 to 40% growth a year. That's doubling every 2 years. And I couldn't keep up. I couldn't build enough boats. Huh. And that's when the industry expanded out. That opened a great big hole in the industry. And a lot of competitors came in. But my big thing on it is don't steal, beat me. And that was kind of the culture that kind of permeated, the joke back about the house at the Ocoee. Hard to steal from somebody when you sleep in their house, especially if you tell them, steal from me, you're a jerk, but beat me, outdesign me. And so that's why the industry moved like it did. There was a parallel to that in the windsurfing industry with Hull Schweitzer. And that's a whole story within itself, maybe not time for it right here. But I knew all that. I knew that history in the windsurfing, and I saw how the windsurfing industry went up high and then exploded.
Well, from what I understand, even the whitewater industry has peaked.
It peaked a long time ago.
Long time ago, right. So, well, actually, something I wanted to ask your opinion on along this line is a few years ago, I read, or I guess I heard or read a talk by Corin Anderson where he talked about the unsustainably low pricing structure of whitewater boats. And it does seem like the price hasn't gone up in 20 years or something like that. Do you have any comment on this?
Yeah, it's like gas stations. When you got 3 gas stations on a corner, 3 corners, everybody keeps dropping their price to get the customer to come. And so we had for a long time, when I sold, there was another roll up, and I was the first to sell. And I knew the industry was going to be rolled up. It was obvious. There was too many VCs out there sniffing around in the industry. And so Andy Zimmerman at Wilderness Systems, Andy was the second roll up. And so they bought Andy, and they bought a few businesses there. Then eventually they all merged together because Watermark that bought me, and actually that was owned by the Bank of Islam. Didn't know any of that when it happened.
Huh.
But all at once, you went from all the other people out there, which was mostly Old Town, had Necky, and of course Old Town and Ocean Kayak. And that was another great brand, Ocean Kayak. Necky, also great brand. But then you had 3 big players out there, and everybody was trying to go after them, and they were bean counters. You didn't have many of the entrepreneurs anymore. So they just kept driving each other to the bottom. And then Watermark went under. They sold at 42 cents on the dollar. They went out and were acquired by Confluence. And then I insisted I had the lease on the building, so they had to move to South Carolina. That's why they're in South Carolina today. And so then there was two of them. So it's like two gas stations on the corner. They look over at each other and go, "We really don't need to do this anymore, do we, buddy?" And so the prices started stabilizing and started going up a little bit, but not much. But what had happened is all the dealers and all the consumers had already gotten, down to $200 kayaks were standard. So when you're trying to charge $1,000, $1,500 for a whitewater rotomolded boat, you just can't get it. And then by that time, you had enough secondary market that was pulling the cycle back in. And in those days, we did design some pretty decent boats, but almost everybody designed boats for themselves. Some of them just came back into vogue. So now there's not enough margin out there to sustain a business or the design and research. That's what Corin's talking about. You just can't sustain it. And he is an unbelievable designer. Really, really good. And he moved in with me when he was 15 years old. And if you hear him again, or he hears this, you tell him that I know he blew out the speakers in my son's stereo. And they'll say it today, and they're only 47 and 43.
Well, how are my friends? I'm a seawater, but how are my friends going to get kayaks in the future if
They'll get them, they won't get new designs. They won't get the innovation, the leading edge, because you some of them are real dogs. You lose on them. You don't hit them all the time. So you got to spend a lot of time in research and development. There's not enough margin in there, not enough volume anymore. Yeah. Not when you can generate. It's like Perception brand now. I guess it was 5 years ago. That brand, that out of the Confluence brand, I think they were doing 250, 300,000 boats. And when I sold, we were doing 50,000 boats. But now all the combined, but out of that Perception brand alone was 54 million. So it was the leading brand, still the leading brand as far as pull on a worldwide basis because it was the first. So what they did is they made good business decisions. They pulled all their boats that went to more mass market under that Perception brand and maximized their return.
Oh. Well, that's a good lead in to something I was wondering about. We're all whitewater boaters, or we think we are, or something like that. But we're really just a small part of the kayaking world now, since the advent of the recreational kayak. Did you see this coming? You were at least initially in the whitewater industry.
Yeah. Well, I started off with Perception, and I protected that brand. And then there was one period of time that there was Trek kayaks, and we owned that also. And that's a story within itself. And sometimes they ever have it. There was Hydra kayaks, and in order to compete with Hydra, I created Trek kayaks. But Trek kayaks, eventually Trek Bicycle said that might not be a good idea on trademark. But they were nice to me, and so they gave me several names. But at the same time, my supplier for airbags and spray skirts, he decided he was going to become a computer programmer, and his company was named Aquaterra, and he gave me the name Aquaterra. Therefore, that started the touring side of the business, because whitewater boaters and touring boaters are not the same element. They're very, very different people. And so then eventually I created Mainstream to go to the mainstream. And that was when we started putting the jazz in, little wreck boats. And that's right about the time I sold.
I see. Well, they definitely dominate now.
Yeah, but see, you didn't want to bastardize either one of those top of the line names. Now, if they hadn't have bastardized them, you'd still be getting a premium for the premium names.
I see.
And then you would have, but the bean counters, they were not part of the religion, and neither are they today. They're there to make money. So that's why Corin gripes, because Corin's still a disciple.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. So
he's crazy.
Yeah, but we like that. Now you're still in South Carolina, and you mentioned how your plant was still there. You come from an area where industry was decimated and they move offshore. As far as I can tell, you didn't follow that path. I was wondering why, and let me frame it another way. How could you afford not to?
We just kept getting good at making stuff, and we made good stuff. And I never, and most people went offshore, went to China. I mean, and it was early days of China. And China, you know, I got this thing about somebody stealing my stuff. And you know, I just never trusted the Chinese. It's just, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to create Third World War, but they had a habit of stealing intellectual property and marketing it in other channels. So I had late in the days, I had some stuff made in China, but it would not be the whole thing. I'd only have little pieces made, so that they'd have to be smart enough to put it all together. But I never felt comfortable going that route with my products.
Well, would it even pay? Like I remember years ago, I think it was '86, I went to New Zealand for the first time, and lo and behold, I met this guy who had the Perception franchise for New Zealand. And I think he said, well, it makes more sense to make it here than to ship it halfway around the world.
Yeah, Michael Fletcher, phenomenal guy. Yeah, he and his partner. What we did there, they had their own machines. We licensed the molds to them, so they paid us a fee on each boat they made. And we also had an operation in Great Britain. Also, we had two. We had one that he bought the franchise out. Then we sold it to Osaka, which is Graham Goldsmith, which is his son's running that today.
So they're still doing it down there?
Yeah, in Great Britain. And then I've lost touch with Michael. Now there was another guy, Chris Ingram, and Chris lives in New Zealander. And Chris was the general manager of Windsurfer. That's how I was so involved in the windsurfing boards. Oh. And I helped Chris design the last machine that Windsurfer had before they went out of business. And he was in part of the rotational molding group also. Good group of people.
Oh. Well, I know the guy I was dealing with, he was in a place called Palmerston North.
Yeah. That's where their factory was.
Yeah. He lent me a
lots of great stories in New Zealand and with Michael.
What is his last name?
Michael Fletcher.
Fletcher. I can't quite. I had to look at my notes.
Michael Fletcher was the guy in Australia who did the paddles, and then there was he was really tall, and the shorter guy was Michael O'Donnell or McDonald?
O'Donnell.
O'Donnell.
Michael. Yeah, and beer talk, I can give you lots of great beer talk stories with Michael. we had this bonding thing.
Well,
I'll give you one last one here. Michael Fletcher and I, we were in Chicago at a big plastic show, and Lou Gilman, and Lou was the guy who invented or designed the machinery that did all the Old Town first rotomolded products, as well as their vacuum formed canoes. And Lou and I and Michael and I were in a hotel, and the air conditioning went out. It was like July. We were about to die. So we go over to Lou's room, and Lou proceeds, and Lou was much older than us and took advantage of our youth. And I tell you, it took me 10 years before I could smell gin again.
Well, it can't be any more hazardous than breathing those fumes, making boats in your early days. So
yeah. I sacrificed a lot of brain cells to the stock.
I'm sure. Well, you were once a recreational boater, just like us.
Yeah.
Once immersing yourself in this as a career, did you maintain an interest? I mean, I know a lot of people that started up rafting companies, and I know one person who manufactures inflatables, and these people don't paddle anymore. They don't have time.
Well, that's part of it. Yeah. I had a life event, and it just, openly. I mean, my first wife passed away when I was 30 years old. And I had a 10-month-old and a 5-year-old, and so the company had started turning around, and after that, a lot of things got changed, and so I focused on trying to be a father as best I could, run a business, not knowing what I was doing. So I had a passion. I took up flying, and I'm a controlled risk taker. That's why I went to kayaking. Kayaking fit me really nicely because you don't have to hurt anybody to be a kayak. You don't have to be out playing football and somebody gets tackled on the other side. You're in kayaking, you that rapid, and that's it. You may have some buddies that are come after you if you eat it, which that was part of the culture. Everybody was on you if you went, and that.
Yeah.
So instead of going out and spending a day kayaking, I went out and flew aerobatics for 20 minutes, and that got my jollies. And I did that. I still fly. I flew last week. I don't fly aerobatics anymore, but I flew. My first 400 hours was aerobatics.
What's
I could do
aerobatics?
everything squirt boaters could do in the air.
That's controlled, huh?
Well, it helped me understand those designs. And there was some great squirt boaters out there. I mean, really understood what was happening to the boat.
Oh yeah, it's a level I've never known. It's
Oh,
amazing.
yeah. Jim Snyder, Jesse Whittemore,
Yeah,
just great people.
and you're still doing it. So, well, so much of your identity is tied to perception, whether you like it or not. I'm sure you like it.
But so much of my
Why did you
life.
choose to move? Why did you choose to move on?
Move on. Oh, from kayaking, selling the business.
No, yeah, the business. I mean, you could
Well,
have gone on forever.
yeah, my first wife and I's dream was the boys to take over the business. My second wife didn't want anything of that. So by then I had 150 people. It was getting hard to run. Competition was coming in. It was getting to be a big business. At 150, you had to turn into being a real manager. And I'm just a gut level entrepreneur. That's just all it is.
Mhm.
And didn't have the greatest home life. And so I thought, wow, if I sell this business, I'll be able to travel and everything will be great. And yay me. So I sold the business, and the VCs who were horrible. And then 6 weeks later, I got a surprise divorce.
Oh,
And so then a year later, I met my love of my life, and that's who I live with now and will for the rest of my life. Happy, great woman.
doesn't sound like you have many regrets in that case.
It was hard at first,
Oh.
painful, but I did well. I told you earlier before we started this that I was trying to get in touch with an old friend of mine, a guy named Glenn Hilliard, who was one of my first stockholders and one of my first mentors, so he could hear this, but I couldn't get. All these old emails don't work anymore, and Glenn's 88 now.
Oh, my.
But Glenn helped me sell the company. Glenn was my quarterback right behind me, and on every move I made, and I was the front person to sell it. And I did well. My peers told me I got 25% more money than anybody thought I'd get. So I cashed out well, invested that in real estate, and now I'm selling that today. That's what I've been doing the last 3 years, is liquidating. 73 now.
Well, it sounds to me continuing just like when you started. You keep on running into people who work well with you, including this 88-year-old guy helping you.
That 88-year-old guy, when he was a kayaker, when I sold my company, he was the president of the ING Group, the 11th largest corporation in the world. He ran the North and South American division of ING. Glenn was doing billion-dollar transactions, billion-dollar transactions at the same time. I'd call him up, and he was doing the transaction with mine. Yeah.
Very good contacts. I love it.
Introductions and working hard and great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's neat. Well, and all this talk about boats, when I tried to research you, somewhere in your resume there was that you're an early contributor to the development of 3D printing technology. Was this a path you were going on before you got into this boating stuff, or
Oh, no,
where does it fit in?
3D, I'm an engineer, I'm an inventor. 3D printing, it's a good thing, but I hold the first patents in 3D printing. It just happened to be dumb enough to be, but those patents were filed in early 80s, but they were the first registered patents in 3D printing. But the idea came up, and no one in the whole 3D industry doesn't know this. The patents, the idea of the patents was, I can tell you right where it was. It was on the bank of the Chattooga River under the 76 bridge. We had just run Section 3. And all the guys in that, I can't say what was happening. I can just say we were drinking beer and other things. But afterwards, you know how you sleep under the stars? You don't sleep in a tent when you're that young.
Yeah.
It was like, why can't you stick those stars together and make something? And that was when the genesis of the patent came up. It says you can't stick them together. You got to have a seed point. You got to have one point that's put them to. And if you could take spitballs or shoot them and hit one point and then start sticking them on each other, then you could build a three-dimensional object. And that was where it came from. And then I didn't have any money. I told my patent attorney, and Court with the time used to be work at the patent office, and he went up, he says, there's nothing. So if you ever look at the first patent, it's the last three digits of 492. It is so broad, it's ridiculous. And there's parts in it that still haven't been explored. But it was a 492 patent for 3D printing, and it was the first on record in the world. So on the side of the river, after having fun with a good day on the river and, thinking wildly, if you get what I mean.
I can't say I ever had such an epiphany sleeping under the stars.
Yeah, so that was 3D printing. And then along the way, that started late 80s. I started developing it because the technology wasn't, the computers and some of the technology, especially the inkjet printing, was just coming together. And I started molding the three of those. And so you had you had Mastercam, which was a control system that controlled robots to do subtractive manufacturing, in other words, machining things away. And then you had inkjet printing coming out on its own. So you take one inkjet printer, you put it on a robotic, a 3-axis robot. You take Mastercam, which is like a page maker, and you can control that robot, and you can spit out those drops with a frequency generator, ever how you want them. Yeah, that started the first part. And so I started doing that. Then I went for this guy I told you that scared me to death, Bob Stewart, really brilliant businessman. Bob gave me one of my best lessons in my life. And he said, that's great. He says, the way you look at it, he says, you have two choices. You take and you put all your eggs in one basket and you watch that basket like a hawk and don't let anybody touch that basket. Or you put a few eggs in a bunch of baskets and expect you're going to lose some of those baskets. And so I retained an ownership position, but I sold out the rights to that patent. And then I kept that one basket, and that one basket was a kayak company.
Oh.
And it did well. But that was Bob Stewart that did that. And at one point in 91, maybe, or something like that, I had sold, and they had raised $15 million in 1990. It's 30-something million today. And I was chairman of the board, but I didn't have any control. And I remember one major stockholder said, "Shut up. You have $4 million in this company. Your net worth is increased $4 million. Just shut up and go back and make kayaks." Little boy. And I did, and they ran it in the ground, and that's history.
it sounds like it might have been too big of a project anyway, when you think
Well,
about it.
I would have wasted, it was the right decision. Watch one basket. I was good at that.
Yeah.
And I had good people around me.
That has been clear. So nowadays, you're filling your time, you're still flying. And are you paddling any?
No, in fact, I've got an appointment Friday afternoon after waiting for 3 months. I've got arthritis in both wrists.
Oh,
So bad that, it's painful to do much of anything. So, so there's no kayaking there, and hammering is out of the question. And I still weld, and and my wife fusses at me about it. But to answer your question, yes, I still try to do things. We've been liquidating real estate. We've rebuilt our house. We rebuilt a mountain house. I've rebuilt 2 industrial buildings in the last 2 years. It's been crazy, really crazy. And I'd serve on the board at Smith, one of the boards, plus the boards on the Smithsonian, but I serve on a board that deals with inventions. And we have an opportunity to do some great things, but it's very bureaucratic. Then my other thing I want to do, and I'd love to find somebody to run it, is I taught peer forums for a long time, and I was really passionate about it. I was a full-on disciple of peer forums. And that's where I get a group of people together and I teach them how to work together. And I was teaching that on the college, in the MBA level until the pandemic hit. So I'd love to either get back into that one or spend more time at the Smithsonian. So those are going to be my 2 focuses going forward. That's what I'm hoping to do.
well, it doesn't sound like you're growing any moss underneath you right now.
No, I can't.
I would be shocked if it were otherwise. Well, you are our hero, and we love hearing your story. Have we missed anything that you think you should bring up?
Well, I started writing off names, and I don't even want to start putting them out there, but I'm up to 30 something names. But the gift you gave me, and other people are listening in, is when I sold the company, and that's been 1998, and I'll be, just open about it, is that was a real painful era. I lost my platform, I lost my everything I stood for. People paid attention to you when you owned Perception Kayaks.
Uh-huh.
And then I lost my marriage, and my sons went off to college, and my life just went totally upside down, and kayaking was not on the horizon. It was bitter, very bitter. And so I made that transition. And so what happened when you came to me and asked me to look at this, I started reliving those days about, how thankful I should be and will be and am. But I'm much more thankful right now, this minute, than I was 2 days ago, because what had happened is this got closer. I started thinking, oh God, this person, this person, this person. So I can't get it off my mind. I have been reliving that whole thing. And the part that I've been reliving more than anything is how blessed I was with so many people come into my life. I mean, I'm just a ragtag mill-hill boy, and redneck to the extreme, and that's the way I grew up. And all at once, by all these people I touched in my life, I made to where I am now. And so, thanks for the gift.
I wish they were all watching right now.
Well, they might.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them. There's a lot. I've got 30 something written out right here, and those were just the real big ones.
No, I'm glad we stirred up those memories. So, well, I see we have some questions on the chat box, and why don't we go through these first, and then people want to just unmute and chime in, that's okay too. I thought that was okay. I've heard there's a push to take out the dam on Lake Tugaloo that could open up more Section 4 type rapids. Are you involved in Chautauqua conservation efforts?
No, but I knew about it 15 years ago. And that push has been pushing a long time. I doubt it. I doubt that push will ever push through. Glenn Hilliard, the guy I told you that helped me sell, Glenn is one of the biggest conservation people in this whole upstate. And so he would know all about it, but I had talked to him about that way earlier. But I don't think it'll ever happen.
Yeah, sounds cool though.
In Section 4, I'd love to know what it looks like down below there.
There are a lot of rivers like that, I can tell you. Actually,
Hello.
back in the early 70s, I made a point when I would see on the road map dam under construction to go run that river before it was drowned. So
Yeah.
Let's see, Bill, I started with the Quest, then the Dancer, then the Awesome Pirouette S. Still have the last two. Thanks. That's not a question, just homage to your good product.
Hi, Bill.
Yeah.
This is Bill Kirby. I'm an old-time whitewater boater. And I don't know if you remember, but I imagine you do. I think it was 73 at the Petersburg Whitewater Weekend. You brought up a bunch of boats. They had a boat show in the local high school. And you had a boat called the Chaga there, a composite. You were building composites in those days. And I always wanted one and I never got one. So my question is, have you ever thought about getting back into the whitewater business and building composite boats, which you probably know are all the rage these days? So what do you think?
Yeah, now I still have that Chaga that I paddled that I broke both ends off of, doing enders at that Bull Sloughs. Yeah. I gave away Adam, my youngest son, is a phenomenal boater. And he's the one that invented the prone kayak and it called Bellyac, and he's not taken off. But to answer your question, I started to make kayaks, a touring kayak 15 years ago named Evolution. Great design, but I realized very quickly that I didn't want employees again and how much trouble that was. And so, no, I probably won't be building anything other than something that entertains me. Right now, I like to build welding art, and so I'm building a burning tree, and we have over 100 trees around our yard, and we got wood everywhere. So I'm building this huge thing. It's only 8 feet tall, probably weigh 1,500 to 2,000 pounds when I'm finished. So that's taking up my time now, and so it's a place to burn everything. But it looks like a tree and it's all made out of big metal. And doesn't that just so I don't have to answer to anybody. I can do everything I want to do with it. But that's what I was doing yesterday all day, and I'll do tomorrow part of it.
I wish it was finished. It'd be interesting to see what this thing looks like.
It's going to be cool.
I see I missed some questions right here. Oh, yeah. I really screwed up. Okay, let's see. Bill, back in the 60s and early 70s, when race boats and cruising boats were the same, we were ripping off Euro designs. Then the USC ones, John, Davy, Bob's, started winning and designing their own boats. Were you borrowing Euro designs? Did they start borrowing yours? Who is driving the train towards short and low volume?
Gosh, I don't know exactly what's being asked there, but I can answer the lower volume. The Dancer was the first short boat. Everything else was 4 meters. And quite frankly, 11.7 just sounded good. It was not anything magic about it. It was just a number that sounded good. And I walked in, and Alan Stansel at the time was one of our model maker designers. And we started off with foam plugs. We'd pour foam into something else and start to have a shell, and we'd start carving. You've done that. And so we made it 11.7. And then Vladimir, he was the one who really started the short boat craze. And he was just a good, crazy person too. But his boats were big, and then of course from there, all the variations. What really started that shorter boat or the lower volume boat craze was the squirt boating. That was Jim Snyder, Jesse Whittemore, that whole group. And a lot of those people gravitated toward us, and we had great relationships with most of them. It was out of all the people we worked with, there was only a handful that didn't come out well. Typically the expectations. Until something's really successful, nobody values it much. But after it's successful all at once, it was way valuable way early.
See what else we have here. Here's a comment. I bought several of your kayaks for myself and my Charlotte Boy Scout troop in the mid-70s when you were a student at Clemson. They were fun, but very brittle, of course. Glad you changed to the rotomoto plastic boats.
Yeah, that was back when it was just poly. And at the time, you couldn't get better resins. There wasn't vinyl esters yet. That was just the old polyesters.
Yeah.
And you didn't, at the time, I didn't even know about elongation of Kevlar, carbon fiber, S-glass, E-glass. Of course, everything was E-glass. You couldn't get S-glass unless you were, aerospace. But all boats were brittle in the air. That's why that chaw guy I told you about broke on both ends.
Now, there's a question here. Did you have anything to do with getting whitewater in the '96 Olympics into the Ocoee?
Yeah, I was. I started off in the '92 Olympics and was in Spain. And then one of my close friends, who was a kayaker, a guy named Russ Chandler. And Russ was the mayor of the Olympic Village in Tennessee. And Russ was, involved with the IOC, International Olympic Committee. And then Russ helped me push that through. Not me, Russ actually did a lot of the lead on that. And then eventually that's when I wound up being the mayor of that village, which was one of the toughest months of my life. Tough, hard, not completely out of my element.
Bill Gordon Bear. My understanding is that then Tennessee Senator Jim Sasser had a lot to do with putting money in the Forest Service budget to build the facility. At the time he was running for re-election in '96, chairman of Senate Finance Committee. But as it turned out, he didn't get re-elected that year. Does that sound about right? That's third or fourth hand information for.
I don't know. I got involved in politics, but only because I got to know Bill Clinton fairly well and Al Gore. And before that, I'd known Reagan a little bit, but I was not a politician. I didn't get deep into the politics. But Sasser, I understand he did, but there's another senator in Tennessee. If you call the name, I'll get it. He was a doctor. He was real influential.
Well, Bill Frist was
Bill Frist.
that that defeated Sasser in '96.
Well, Bill, did he do it in '96 or did he do it earlier? Because I had dinner with him at the Olympics. But the guys who really pushed that at the time was the mayor of Cleveland, Tennessee. They were really instrumental in getting the Ocoee to be in the Olympics. But Russ is the one that went back to '92 with the IOC. And that was Russ Chandler. And he was the mayor of the Olympic Village in Atlanta. And Russ was a piece of work. And we've paddled out west, Costa Rica, fishing in a lot of places. I mean, there's lots of good beer stories. That's the history I know of how it got there. I just had to be the mayor and do the opening ceremonies and pin the little badges, the mayor badges on everybody, and I could not pronounce words. I'm Southern, so I couldn't announce to people and Herzo Vadinga. And I had the best. So here I am, I'm 46 years old, and I had a 72-year-old handler. And she called me Daddy Bear. and Daddy Bear, we're going to work this out. So every ceremony, and we did the whole ceremonies in Cleveland, Tennessee. I mean, we raised a flag, we had the anthems, everybody stood at attention, all those things. And she wrote everything out phonically. And so I read phonics. It was hilarious. And she was a handler for the Air Force and had retired. And she brought her mother to the Olympics, and she was 72. She was a piece of work. She was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Well, I didn't expect to get a positive answer about that. That's pretty impressive. Well, I got one question here. It's a dumb comment, but it's interesting. Why is my wife's white Mirage still alive? These friends of mine, she has been paddling a Mirage since the beginning of the 1990s, and she would have nothing else but that boat.
Well, first off, you can tell she's a really smart woman. But you know, the thing about polyethylene and the problem with cross-link polyethylene, and that was the error, that boat could have been cross-linked. You can tell by finding out how much it weighs. And then of course, you can tell that on the last 3 digits of when it was made, the year and the month. But when we were doing the cross-link, they were typically lighter because it was a stiffer resin of the era. Then we went on to linear low density polyethylene because it molded really easy. So guys on third shift couldn't screw it up. And that's why they weigh more.
Yeah, well, as a bunch of us are getting older, all the boats weigh more and more every year. So
Yes, they do. That's why you drag them.
yeah.
Bill, do you think that without pigment, it's lasted longer? It hasn't dried out, or would that have anything to do with it?
If it's been in the sun and it's still alive, what do you know about color? Hey, whomever it,
It's white.
what? Oh,
Or when-
the
Not
titanium. Yeah, the titanium dioxide it's a natural UV inhibitor, but if it's been in the sun, it's got to be a cross-link boat. If it hasn't been in the sun, it could be either one. But if it's a linear polyethylene and it's been in the sun for 10, 20 years, hit it with a sledgehammer, it'll shatter. If it's cross-link, it probably won't.
I'm going to bring my sledgehammer next time I see her and check this out.
Okay.
You read about a murder in the newspaper, you know why.
Yeah, she killed you.
Well, I've read the written comments. Please, anybody else speak up? This is a golden moment.
Well, you know, when these things get long, the people can't watch them that long. But you're
Bill, I have a question. This is Bill Kirby again. I worked at Appalachian Outfitters in the early 70s, and I'm sorry Jim Stewart's not on this call, on this video, because he was the main guy. But I don't know if you had any contact with him. As I remember, I was only there in the early 70s, probably before your rotomolded boats came out. Did you ever have contact with them? They were the biggest dealer in the DC area back in those days.
You know, I by nature, you know, when I'm in a group like this, and a little smaller group, and I kind of have looked forward to this because it made me remember. But I'm basically an introvert, and so I don't go out of my way to go talk to people, and that surprises a lot of people. My wife and I both, we're introverts. And she's much more than me. So we kind of stay to ourselves. So to answer your question, even during the run of the company, you know, Risa was the kind of people, and we had great salespeople also that went out. We had one, Tom Slinker. Tom could go into a crowd of people who wanted to kill each other and become one or two of them's friend all the time, because he would just talk them to death. But he was a great salesman.
I'm sorry we didn't sell a bunch of your boats back in the day. I'm sure we would have if they were around when I was there.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Well, anybody else? We-
Well, questions, but I just think it's awesome that you're here and really appreciate your time. And it's delightful to see you, my old boss. You look great. You look terrific.
Thank you. Well, yeah, you also, I mean, I tell you, this getting older, sometimes it's got goods and bads. I just don't like the part that hurts.
Yeah, well, this is, you got a hardcore crew here. Paddling's our passion, and you're one of the river gods. We
Wow.
appreciate what you've done for us. And so,
I was going to say, I love that as part of learning about, kayaks and your business, you kept going off into different threads on your life and business and the opportunities that came your way and the troubles. And it's been a very interesting story. And Ed knows how to get those stories too.
Good.
So,
Yeah. I want my epitaph to say he ate everything on his plate.
I like
pretty
that.
good. Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
We reckon that's a Robert Heinlein quote, isn't it?
what was
Thanks,
that?
Bill.
Okay, everybody okay? I appreciate it.
Thank
Well,
you.
you- thank you
It
very
was
much.
wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
If
Yeah.
you have a copy of this, I want to send it to Glenn, my friend.
It will be posted on our YouTube site. I will send you the link.
Thank you, ma'am. Greatly appreciate it.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Come up and visit us sometime too.